Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative David Millard of the 109th District in Columbia County. One of the biggest and most important challenges facing the state legislature each and every year is the adoption of a budget. Governor Corbett has proposed a budget that holds the line on spending. It's now the legislature's job to craft a spending plan for the next fiscal year. Joining me now to discuss this year's budget is Majority Appropriations Chairman Bill Adolph. Representative Adolph, thanks for being here.
Nice to be here, Dave.
I see that the governor's proposal this year is for a $27.138 billion total general fund spend, and that actually represents $22 million less, or 0.1% reduction in spending of last year, and it contains no tax increases, and it certainly is holding the line on spending. Now, that having been said, I know that there are many areas of concern across Pennsylvania how those dollars are going to be spent. And you've mentioned many times to us that this is a blueprint, the governor's blueprint, and serving on appropriations with you, that it will be up to the Appropriations Committee as well as the entire legislature to look at this blueprint and come up with a final plan that obviously we're going to have to vote on.
Yeah, that's right, David. And, the governor, met his constitutional requirement of introducing a budget proposal. And no governor's budget proposal has ever been signed into law exactly the way that he has proposed it in February. And the governor puts together a budget proposal based upon revenues that he had available as of January 31st. And the rest he projects. And at the time that the governor was proposing his budget, he was estimating a $700 million deficit. Now, fortunately, the legislature, we get several more months to look at the revenues, and fortunately February was above our projections, and March is looking very well. So April traditionally is our strongest month of the fiscal year. So we're hoping that the revenues for the last 4 months of the fiscal year are better than the first 8. And with that being said, that's when some of the restorations can be made into some of the line items that the legislatures and as well as the Pennsylvania residents are concerned about.
And I think it's important to us to explain to our listening audience that, again, when revenues are projected, if the actual dollars that come in are less than the projections, that's when we arrive at a deficit.
That's correct.
And face the next year's budget with a current year deficit and have to deal with it in the absence of the current fiscal year, but then the ensuing fiscal year. And as we looked, and you mentioned that we've had a positive month in one of our past months of growth. We certainly are hoping that that trend will continue, and that March will come in on the positive side, that April will be our biggest month on the positive side. But does that, at the end of the fiscal year, even with those positive months of revenue, does that still leave us in a deficit situation?
It's probably going to be very difficult to end the year with a surplus, that's for sure. We had projected a 3.5% increase in revenues. And most economists agreed with our projections was a conservative increase based upon that we were coming out of a recession. And sometimes you can have a 6% increase in revenue coming out of recessions. It's a slow economy, and this is just not Pennsylvania. I mean, I met with colleagues from across the nation in Philadelphia that have the same title as I do, and it was a seminar for a day and a half, and I left that meeting, David, feeling good about the fiscal shape that Pennsylvania is. Illinois, for example, they raised their state income tax by 30%. So, you know, you can't talk about this year's budget without mentioning the previous year's budget. I mean, we were faced with the unsustainable spending. The previous administration increased spending 33% in 8 years. Cost of living was only 19%. We had federal stimulus money in there, and that's what made it easy to spend this money. Well, on June 30th, 2011, that all ended, about 12% of our revenue. So we put together a budget last year without the help of federal stimulus money, and tried to get Pennsylvania back into a dependable, sustainable revenue stream. And I think that's what we're going to continue to do. Unlike Washington, D.C., Dave, we have to have a balanced budget. We just can't say, oh, it's a deficit. No, we have to make up for that with real tax money. In next year's tax money, we have to pay for last year's deficit. We balance our budget, which is a good thing, So I don't think we're going to come in at $700 million deficit, but I don't think we're going to have a surplus either. Just make sure that everybody files their tax returns on time, because 40% of our revenue comes from the Pennsylvania income tax.
Sure. And the message that we gave last year was to, in incurring the cutbacks of all of the agencies across the board, was to look for inefficiencies, look for overlaps, you know, do the best that you can to prioritize your programs. And I think the message this year, in light of what you're saying, is that we still have to prioritize the priorities so that those dollars are being spent in the most efficient manner. And in my community, we have Bloomsburg University.
Sure.
So in addition to K through 12 education, higher education is of great concern to my constituents, to me. And I know that last year, the initial proposal, or I say last year, but this current fiscal year, the governor's blueprint called for in excess of 50% cut in higher education. And that number was brought down significantly as we worked together with our Appropriations Committee and fellow legislators to keep those numbers in check. The situation this year is that the state system of higher education, the 14 state-owned institutions, are being asked to look at a 20% cut in this fiscal year. And I know that we'll be doing our due diligence to work on those numbers as well. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what some of the other priorities, perhaps in your area or across the state in the bigger picture, are with concerns about the budget.
Well, education, Dave, makes up 40% of our spending, 36% for K to 12. And I think all legislators are concerned about education funding. And, you know, there's a formula, a very complicated formula, the way we distribute the money. But obviously, which makes our job very difficult is that we appropriate $10 billion, I'm going to round that off, in public education funding. We don't have anything to do with putting together the 500 school district budgets. That's all done at a local level. And these individual boards get elected by their local residents. So we provide a funding stream to them, and that funding stream varies from school district to school district depending on your per capita and the market value of your homes. Actually, you know, the poorer areas receive more state funding than richer areas based upon this formula. But we don't have anything to say regarding their budgets. So I think all legislators are sensitive to this. We get probably as many phone calls regarding school property taxes as we do state income taxes. And we provide funding. My school districts get about 12 to 15% of their budgets from the state. Some of my neighboring districts get as much as 70% based upon the wealth of the district. So I think that if I was going to say there's one area that all legislators are sensitive about, it would be K-12 funding. And I know we have legislators that are on the Appropriations Committee, and they have shared with us some of the real tragedies that have gone throughout their districts, and people have lost their homes and so forth as a result of not being able to pay their school property taxes. So that's probably the #1 priority, and we're going to try our best to try to restore some of the accountability block grants, which a lot of our superintendents and a lot of our school boards have asked, because it gives them some flexibility in the way they spend some of this money. That's probably #1. And obviously, we have 14 state-owned universities, and obviously, when the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania owns these universities, we are responsible for the upkeep, and we are responsible for the running of this. They have their own boards and so forth, and but we provide a funding stream. And not only are they providing an affordable education, they also are the economic engines in these small little college towns. And I know Westchester University is closest to my district, and I know Bloomsburg is to you. I mean, that little community needs those colleges to make that economy go. A lot of jobs. So we're very sensitive of that, and we had the presidents in, and Dave, I mean, you had an opportunity to ask questions and get some feedback from the university presidents, and we're going to work with them to do our best in trying to restore funding for them, because they guaranteed us that they are watching their spending and have it under control. So we're going to do our best.
And you mentioned what an economic engine they are, and in the instance of Bloomsburg University in my community, we've always stated that that's the largest smokeless industry in the community. Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned the 500 school districts, and the funding that they receive from the state varies. And as much as they share in common as school districts with regard to providing our children with proper education, they have just that much that is not in common because of the geographics and,
sure,
and the industrial nature of the areas that they're in. And the bottom line is that those state dollars are important to them. And in addition to that, the leaving local control with the school boards to determine the direction they'll take.
Dave, a lot of times in the conversations, and I talked a little bit about the loss of the federal stimulus money. Well, in education, we lost $1 billion in federal stimulus money. And a lot of school districts received less total money last year. But that loss of money was directly as a result of the loss of federal stimulus money. We actually put more state dollars into K-12 last year than we did the year before. So, and that gets lost in the conversations. And I know I've talked to my local superintendents, and they understand it. But the message doesn't always get out there that way. And the state has always made education a top priority, whether it's at the higher education level or whether it's at K-12. And the school boards, they have a tough job, and everybody wants to provide a good education. But the state will try to restore that accountability grant money. How much, I'm not sure, Dave. It all depends on the way the revenue's coming in, because we're certainly not sitting on a pile of cash up here. I mean, we are is still going through a slow recovery out of the recession.
Well, we'll continue to work together on that. And
Yes.
With that, let's take a short break. Legislative report. We'll return in a moment.
Did you know that Act 16 of 1999 honors one of the greatest leaders in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives? The Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building, once known as the Capitol Annex, is located next to the main Capitol building and honors the late Speaker of the House, Matthew J. Ryan. Those who visit this building will observe the magnificent architectural designs providing eloquence and grandeur to the building. Known as one of the greatest members in the history of the Pennsylvania State House, Matthew Ryan started his career in the legislature in 1963 and was elected Speaker in 1981. His charisma and knowledge will forever be reflected in the building now named after this great legislative leader. Now you know.
Did you know that in the corridors in the first floor of the Capitol of Pennsylvania, there are nearly 400 individual mosaics? The idea for creating these intricate tiles was first suggested by Henry C. Mercer in 1902. A year later, he received the commission to prove 16,000 square feet of pavement tiles for the Great Rotunda and corridors of the new State Capitol building in Harrisburg. Mercer set about designing subjects for approximately 400 mosaics. He chose as his general theme the history of Pennsylvania, and he soon realized that his tiles could tell stories. Although the arrangement seems random, the mosaics are very thoughtfully placed in the floor. The tile sequence is roughly chronological, beginning at one end with the scenes depicting the Native Americans. The mosaics progress into the story of European habitation in the New World and encompass the Commonwealth's triumph through process and intervention. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. I'm State Representative David Millard. I'm pleased to have Representative Bill Adolph as my guest. He's chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and we're discussing the state budget. Chairman Adolph, we've discussed education, we discussed overall revenues coming into the state and what this proposed budget represents in comparison to this fiscal year. And I think that it's important to note that in this current proposal, 33 line items are either eliminated or consolidated, and an additional 164 line items are reduced. Now, contained within those line items, which are part of a voluminous gathering of line items in that 4-inch thick budget book, are those that are relative to the Department of Public Welfare. And I know that sometimes when we say Department of Public Welfare, it has a negative overtone to it. However, I think it's equally as important to point out that that program, that Department of Public Welfare, is a very large umbrella, and contained under that umbrella are a myriad of programs that really are important in each and every one of our communities. And I know that in the rural area of Pennsylvania that I represent in Columbia County, that we have a lot of service providers, whether they're public or private, that receive state funding for a multitude of programs, MR programs, assisted living programs, and the list just goes on and on. And I think that one of the biggest voices out of my community with regards to this proposal has been the cutbacks in those social programs. And if you could offer some comments on that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure, I'd be glad to. David, I agree with you with your statement that sometimes the Department of Public Welfare brings a negative meaning. The line items that are included in that department, in my opinion, needs to be narrowed down, and it's too broad of a department, number one. There's a lot of health issues in the Department of Welfare. And the reason why it is that way is because a lot of these line items bring down federal money, okay, under the welfare title. And that's why they remain under welfare. But I think we certainly could add the words human services to this conversation. 80% of that budget, and once again, it's right around the 40%. 40% for education, 40% for the Department of Welfare. So we're talking about $10 billion. We trimmed it $1 billion off of that department last year based upon sound audits done by our Auditor General and his recommendations that there was a lot of waste and abuse in that department. And I think our Secretary of Welfare, Alexander, has done a tremendous job in trying to eliminate that waste and abuse, but eliminated $1 billion worth of spending. Now there's not a lot of low-hanging fruit, and now we're getting right down into the core services, and that's why, David, you're hearing from your social service providers. And I met with the ARC of Delaware County just yesterday, and talked to some parents who have mentally retarded, disabled individuals living with them, and the money that they will need if these services are cut. 80% is federal mandated. 80% are federal mandated. So we can only increase or decrease 20% of that budget, sure, because 80% is mandated. What we're trying to do is we're going to try to evaluate how much is getting to the providers, and making sure that the services for the needy are being provided. So I met with some providers just yesterday and asked this one woman, how much do you get for providing for this 19-year-old, or I think she's 22 years old. She says $26,000 a year. That's what this provider gets paid out of these funds. And somewhere along the line, there was more money, but it never got to the provider. So we got to make sure that the administration of this money is not being spent before it gets to the person actually doing the providing. And but these folks, they talk very highly of the providers. They talk highly of these community group homes, that they have volunteers that go around and they check on these homes, make sure these folks are being taken care of properly, and so there's no physical or sexual abuse taking place. That we have unscheduled licensing going there to make sure that these places are up to date and comfortable for these folks, because the difference between providing for someone at home is $88,000 as compared to someone in an institution, $266,000. So these folks that are being taken care of in their own home, okay, cost the taxpayers an awful lot less than the way they were institutionalized in previous years. So we have a lot of work to do, David, because no one in the legislature wants to deprive these individuals, that need these type of services, and we're going to make sure that they receive the services that they deserve, and we just want to make sure that the tax dollars are getting to them. So we got to make sure we correct that. What the governor was trying to do here is that he wanted to give more flexibility to the counties. And there are 7 grants that the counties used to receive, and there's a lot of strings attached to each one of those categories. And once that money was spent, in that category, they had to wait till next year, even though maybe that one silo was still half full. They couldn't take money out of that to take care of some other area. So they had, the administration was talking to County Commissioners Association, and they thought, why don't we do this block grant, no strings attached, spend the money for these 7 areas the way you see fit. But with it came a 20% cut. And, I don't know where that 20% came from, David, and I think that's the problem. Either the county commissioners, they like the idea of a block grant, but they didn't like the idea of a 20% cut. So we had to find out what the right number is, and maybe, as suggested by the County Commissioners Association, maybe a pilot program in maybe a half a dozen or a dozen counties instead of statewide. So we have a lot of work to do yet on the budget, because with limited funds and trying to build the economy, I think we all agree that it's not the time to tax the residents right now, because they're having a hard time making ends meet too. So we have to live within our means, and that's what the state's going to do.
Well, and I think that you highlighted several things today with regards to that. The fact that it is one of the 2 largest users of our state tax dollars, and that certainly our goal is not to deprive anybody in need who has a true need for it, but to ensure the efficiency, the integrity, and the availability of those dollars, that they're used in a very prudent and necessary manner, and to provide that flexibility that we don't want to, as a legislature, put up roadblocks. We want to ensure that there is some flexibility in addition to the accountability, that those dollars get to the needed purpose
that's right.
that they're intended for.
That's right.
And as we come to a close with this presentation today, there are many more items that we could have talked about, and certainly hopefully we can do another program in the future that will highlight some additional areas of concern, and there are many. When you're talking $27 billion, we're not talking a small amount of money here, and we have to understand that a large amount of dollars like that in a general fund goes to a variety of programs. So I want to thank you for being on the program, and that's all the time that we have for today's program. If you have comments or questions about these or any other legislative topics, my contact information will be on the screen in a moment. Thanks for watching, and join me again for Legislative Report.